Art Dodge enters a house and asks for Mrs. Doyle. He claims that her husband, Benjamin Doyle, bought a painting last week. It's Benjamin's wake, so Mrs. Doyle lets him in. She never knew her husband was interested in art. Back in his gallery, Art asks his assistant Gloria if he has any messages. He hasn't paid her in a long time, and they have a lot of pending bills. At a cafe, he keeps reading obituaries in the newspaper and finds his next target. He drives down to the next wake with another painting. He asks for Mr. Paletto, with the same story about him buying a painting. The deceased man's son, Gene, doesn't believe that his father bought any painting. He knows how much his dad hated modern art and wants to beat up Art for attempting to take advantage of their misfortune. When he asks his assistants to beat Art up, he runs away and enters another room. Art quickly cuts the line in a room where he knows Gene won't attack him. He offers his condolences after Betty, but Gene keeps threatening him. Art sneaks out and hides in Betty's car. Gene, who was once married to Betty, follows her outside. He tries to talk to her, but she seems happier after their divorce. Gene tries to impress her by sharing that he's seeing her shrink, Dr. Huffire. Betty feels like she will have to change hers, because she doesn't want to share anything with him. When they're on the road and Gene is out of the way, Betty asks Art to get out of hiding. She thanks him for making her day exciting. She brings him to her hotel room and sleeps with him. When he asks her to make a wish later, a man on the floor above them is trying to take off his ring. It slips and falls and lands directly in Betty's hand. It seems like her wish has come true when she makes Art wear the ring. She seems very serious about making him her third husband. Both her previous marriages were to Gene. When the paparazzi ask Betty about Art, she proudly claims that he's her fiancé. The next morning, Art tries to get into the shower with Betty. He's embarrassed when it turns out to be Betty's sister Liz. Art later hears Liz asking Betty if she knows Art well enough to marry him. Betty seems sure of her decision and keeps talking to wedding vendors. Art tries to talk to Betty, but Liz keeps making snide comments about Art trapping her sister. Betty has already picked a date for the wedding and thinks the third one will be lucky. We hope so. Gloria teases Art about his engagement in the newspaper, even if he explains that it's a misunderstanding. He doesn't intend to get married to someone as extreme as Betty and hopes she gets over him soon. Gloria warns Art about Manny in his office, who wants to take back his paintings. Nothing has sold in 3 months, but Art convinces him to keep the paintings and not worry about money. Manny admires one of Art's paintings, so he gifts it to him as an advance on the money he owes Manny. Art's father, Mr. Dodge, starts flirting with Gloria again. He has Korsakoff's syndrome, because of which he keeps forgetting things, even the fact that he has flirted with Gloria many times. Mr. Dodge thinks Art got him to the wrong house because he remembers the one in Madrid where they lived with his wife. She passed away 4 years ago, so Art asks him to get used to their new home. While fitting Art's outfit for the wedding, Betty's on call to finalize their cake. He starts praising her when they're alone and assures her that he doesn't deserve her. When he also suggests that 2 weeks is too soon to get married, she shouts and runs away. Liz assumes he hurt Betty, but Art explains what they discussed. Liz still thinks a guy like Art is not good for Betty. Art apologizes to Betty, who also wants him to share his opinions after she has cooled off. She's still hell-bent on getting married. Art assures her he's all in, but thinks that Liz will be a problem. Betty knows Liz doesn't like him because he's not her type. Liz teaches art at the university and always goes for the intellectual guys with glasses. When Art gets back to the gallery, he finds that Mrs. Doyle has returned the painting. His mail is filled with reminders of unpaid bills and something about his last contact lenses. When Art tries on his specs, he notices Gene and his men in the driveway. He opens his hair and pretends to be Art's twin brother, Bart, in front of Gene. He asks Gloria to send a message to Art to contact him. He heads out confidently and asks Gloria from the phone to call Betty's place in 20 minutes. In front of Betty, Art makes up a story about his identical twin. He makes sure Liz also hears the part about Bart being an artist who broods and paints. Bart is apparently back from Italy after years of not meeting him. When Gloria calls Betty to send a message from Bart, Art pretends he's talking to Bart. All the while, Gloria makes fun of his elaborate plan to seduce a woman. Art keeps pretending he's glad to hear from Bart and is eager to meet him. In front of Mr. Dodge, Art keeps mentioning Bart so that he believes he has 2 sons. Mr. Dodge soon comes to his senses and realizes that Art is asking him to lie. Art insists he needs his help with a woman and asks him to play along. Mr. Dodge finds it funny that Art is in love with the sister of the woman he's about to marry. One day, Art asks Gloria to lie to Betty about Bart being in the office instead of him. He opens his hair and wears specs to look like Bart. Gloria plays along, and Betty also believes that Bart is different from Art. As Bart, Art claims he's happy that his brother is finally dating a classy woman like her. He keeps brooding till Betty thinks he's perfect for Liz. She invites him over for dinner that night. Bart leaves the gallery, asking Gloria to make his brother call him. While Betty is still in the gallery, Art rushes to a store and changes into new clothes to look like Art. Betty informs him about meeting his brother and thinks he'll be a great best man. When Art gets out to the car, he finds Betty arguing with Jean. She saves him from Jean and takes him along with her. That night, Art comes for dinner dressed up as Bart and pretends to brood in front of Liz. She has heard about him and insists she doesn't like Art. Bart explains that Art had to do extreme things because they grew up without money. Betty assumes he is Bart too, and knows from a call from Art recently that he can't make it for dinner. Bart explains that Art had to stay back to care for their father, who has memory problems. Betty pretends to care when Liz and Bart start discussing Art. She gets distracted when Jean brings a love boat with their names to woo her. Betty asks him to leave, but Jean wants to celebrate their second marriage's anniversary. Betty wants to forget their marriage because of his anger issues. Jean keeps reminding her of the good times and insists that he has changed. He asks Betty to dance with him, while Bart also asks Liz for a dance. He is relieved that she's not married and plays ball with her dog, Hopper. When Jean calls Art a monkey, Betty gets angry and walks off. Betty asks Bart and Liz to enjoy, so he keeps dancing with her. One day, Bart turns up at Liz's college and pretends to talk to the students. She invites him for coffee, and they discuss how tough it is to teach kids. When he mentions that he still paints to impress her, she wants to see his work. Art calls Manny to the gallery for some work and asks Gloria to keep him distracted for an hour. He then brings Liz to Manny's studio to show off the paintings. Liz loves the one he actually made, so he gifts it to her. When Art is hanging out with Liz and Betty, Gloria informs him about a message from Liz. He calls Liz pretending to be Bart from inside the house. She invites him over to their place, so he pretends he's busy and asks her for dinner. He tries to get out of dinner with Betty that night, but she doesn't budge. That night, he adds something to Betty's wine that the waiter also notices. Art asks him to stick to his business since he paid for the drink. When Betty comes back to the table, he makes sure she drinks it. She falls asleep on their way back, so he drags her to her room. He dresses up as Bart and falls into the pool while trying to come out of the other side. When he rings the doorbell, Liz lets him change into Art's clothes since he's wet before their date. She brings him back to the same restaurant from earlier, where the waiter recognizes him. He's not eager to serve wine to them, but Bart makes sure he does. Liz doesn't know how serious Betty is about Art. Bart asks Liz to reason with Betty because Art is apparently worried about her rushing things. Liz knows Betty enough to understand that she can't be reasoned with. Bart still hopes he can be good friends with Liz. Against his best judgment, he decides to come to the house when Liz invites him in. They discuss Liz's first meeting with Art in the shower. Bart seems sure Art must be humiliated about how he acted. He calls her tough and kisses her passionately. They sleep together, but Liz hears him uttering Betty's name in his dreams. Bart pretends it was a nightmare and assures Liz that he only wants her. He suddenly realizes that Betty is about to wake up and pretends he needs to wash his face. He quickly rushes to the other side of the house and slips into bed with Betty before she wakes up. He pretends to have a headache too and goes to find aspirin. He runs back to Liz's room and pretends he needs more time in the bathroom. He goes back to Betty, who asks him for a neck massage. He then makes another excuse, but falls into the pool while trying to rush to Liz. He pretends he took a shower while Liz is getting late for work. He keeps going back and forth till Liz is ready to leave for work and asks him to stay. He pretends he wants to leave before he runs into Art. He sleeps in his office, and Gloria makes fun of how hard it is to juggle two sisters. When Art is cooking for his dad and his poker buddies at home, he spots Jean's men. He asks all the elders for help and insists that they should start the car. Jean's men notice them leaving and follow their car. The elders keep bumping into other cars and driving rashly to avoid Jean's men. They make an impossible jump where Jean's men get stuck and lose the car. His dad drops him off at Gloria's place, who is sleeping with Manny. When Art explains that he needs a quiet place to stay for the night, Manny gives him the keys to his studio. Jean's men find Art in the studio and beat him up. Jean asks Art to make sure he turns up for the wedding the following day. He loves Betty and doesn't want her to be left at the altar. Liz comes to check on him at the studio and tries to help. Art starts flirting with her and confesses that he loves her. Liz seems confused when he mentions that he fell for her when he saw her in the shower. When he admits that he is Art, she asks him for information about Betty to confirm it. She doesn't like that Art is apparently betraying Bart and her sister to flirt with her. He keeps insisting that he loves Liz and wants to be with her. She doesn't let him kiss her and walks off. Mr. Dodge and Art drive to the wedding, and he turns up outside Betty's room dressed as Bart. Liz still thinks Art flirted with her last night and apologizes to Bart for his brother's behavior. She doesn't want to let Art marry Betty after he confessed his feelings for her. Bart agrees to that idea and asks Liz to share everything from last night with Betty. Liz confesses everything she knows to Betty, but she doesn't believe her. Art comes out as himself, but Betty still seems sure about marrying him. Huffire thinks Art is lucky for landing someone like Betty. He tries to examine Art's ring, but Liz takes him away. She asks Art to wait in a room while she brings Bart to him. He comes out of the other door as Bart. Meanwhile, Betty calls Maria to ask for help in getting Huffire. While on the call, Maria stays in the same office room with Betty and keeps the phone connected. Liz finds Bart and asks him to enter the same room where she left Art. With the door slightly ajar, Art keeps opening his hair, putting his specs on, and taking them off to pretend that both Art and Bart are in the room. They seem to discuss how Art is making a mistake by marrying Betty. When Jean enters the room, Art pretends Bart ran away from the window. All this while, Betty can hear this conversation. Art asks Jean why he wants Betty to marry him when he's in love with her. Jean claims that only Betty's wishes matter, and that Art needs to marry Betty if she likes him. Jean also knows that Art will only be temporarily with her because Betty will realize how much he loves her instead. Betty walks down the aisle but objects to the wedding. She gets back with Jean and kisses him. As she marries him again, Liz notices Hopper asking Art for the ball. This makes her finally realize that Art and Bart are the same. Art throws away his ring, which finds its way back to its original owner, Huffire. Bart makes up a story about heading back to Italy in front of Liz. She doesn't say much and lets him leave. Sometime later, Gloria is running the gallery with Art's work on display. Even the painting he gifted to Liz, which found its way back, is hung on a wall. Liz admits she knows he's Bart and Art. She assumes he wanted to have both sisters and was playing with their feelings. Art admits that he became Bart because Liz didn't like him the way he was. He wonders which version of him he needs to be for her, so she kisses him.